Welcome, everyone, to another edition of CPAC Live. I'm joined today by Michi Iljazi, one of my great colleagues here at the American Conservative Union. And Michi, within a number of hours here, I'm getting on an airplane, and I'm going to Tulsa.
Today's my third anniversary at ACU.
Oh, it is?
Year, yep.
That's great. I have so many things I could say.
Yeah, I know.
Off your anniversary. But anyway, I'm heading off to Tulsa. The president's going to be in Tulsa for a rally on Saturday. There's been over 1 million people that have asked for tickets to go to this rally. It's a real flashpoint in this whole debate about whether or not America's ready to open up or America wants to stay closed down. Those of you who have been watching the show realize I'm an open it up guy, even though I have an 80-year-old mom who lives 3 hours from Tulsa, and she's not going to go to the rally because she does have some health issues. So everybody's, the great thing about being a conservative in America is we believe that you get to govern your life.
Make your own choices.
You get to make your own choices. And that's how we should also view our health care. And on today's show, we have a great friend and great thinker in Phil Kerpen, who runs American Commitment and is involved in many other important nonprofits, including an organization that we've been helping work with called the Coalition Against Socialized Medicine. Phil, as you look at everything that's going on politically in your country, do you recognize it?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, Matt, I think we've been sort of on this trend line for a while. So this is sort of the logical, insane endpoint of, liberals who think that they know better than everyone else how we ought to live our own lives. And they've taken that now to this absurd extreme with all of these orders. And of course, their hypocrisy has never seen greater heights either, because they believe that, liberal political organizing is somehow exempt from virus risk that's very serious at conservative political organizing. And they see no contradiction in this. In fact, the doctors and the nurses that have been ordering all the rest of us to stay home go and march in the liberal political rallies, but then attack and criticize anyone who might want to go to a Trump rally. So, I think it's reached a level of sort of surrealism, of sort of absurdity that I'm not sure I thought I would ever see. But it didn't come out of nowhere. This is sort of a trend that they've been on for a long time, unfortunately.
It's been a long time coming, and in the healthcare field generally, you're someone who opines on a whole matter of public policies. But in the healthcare field especially, you do have this kind of nanny state mentality that the federal government has to touch every aspect of our healthcare in order to keep us safe. And so you've seen this trend over time of the government just taking over more and more. How will this, what should we be looking for in the next year? Is it all about the drive towards Medicare for all, which is a terrible concept?
Well, they're trying, and certainly we're seeing the pandemic means we need to have a socialized, government-run healthcare system. Has sort of been a push. That was, I think, an earlier push from left. I haven't seen it as much in the last couple of weeks because, I think every major error that we've made in the United States has been an error of big government. And you sort of look at the countries that had the worst meltdowns with this pandemic. They all have socialized government-run healthcare systems. Countries like Belgium, France, Italy, Spain, where they had just catastrophic outcomes. It was all sort of government run. And then you sort of look at what were the things that we did catastrophically wrong in this country. And I would, I would say there are three big errors, and they were all sort of government errors. Number one, the CDC said, we're going to run the only test. We're banning the private sector from doing testing. We're going to handle it. And of course, they were hopelessly inept. Their test was so bad that not only did it not work, but it was probably contaminated with virus, which is to say that if it had gone out and been used, it probably would have infected people. If we had actually learned the lesson from South Korea, which was what the liberals kept saying, we're terrible, we're not like South Korea, we don't have the testing. Well, in South Korea, they outsourced the entire thing to the private sector. There was no government test in South Korea. They basically brought in 10 private companies and they said, build the test, build the testing centers, do this. And the whole thing was outsourced. And we eventually did follow that model. And we now have a vast amount of testing. If anything, we have too much testing now because it lets the media go crazy with these headlines about finding positives, even though the whole point of test and trace was to test as many positives as you can and find them so they can isolate themselves. And now we have mass scale testing once we turned it over to the private sector. So I think error number one was the government error of thinking that they should run the testing instead of the private sector. Error number two, I would say, was the memo that went out from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services saying to indefinitely postpone all non-emergency medical procedures. They called them elective, but I mean, they were including cancer surgeries, cancer screenings. I mean, the word elective, I think, is crazy for that. And, I think we're going to see, we're going to have a big challenge now catching up with all of those procedures and, avoiding a really bad outcome as a consequence of that. And we're probably going to see significant increase in deaths from that decision. Although I will point out, and this is important, we're going to do a much better job catching up on all those postponed procedures than the socialized countries will. I've seen that the UK has a 2-year delay now to catch up on the 3 months of procedures.
They always do. So like my mom is 80, as I told you, she lives in Wichita. She has had, I don't know, about a half dozen very close friends die, not of Chinese corona, but of other illnesses, which I fear, and she fears, became more severe because they were trying to do the right thing. They didn't want to go gum up the work.
This is where this area really made things worse because, people were getting strokes and heart attacks and not going to the emergency room, these empty cardiac wings all over the country, because basically one of two things: either they wrongly believed the hospitals were too busy to care for them, or they were so scared of catching the virus in the hospital, they just stayed at home. And those presentations were down dramatically. And that, of course, is going to show up in the death numbers eventually. So when people talk about the excess deaths, unfortunately, a lot of those, I think, are non-COVID deaths because of sort of the panic and the hysteria that we had. And then the third huge government failure, of course, is in the nursing homes. And I could give you 2 hours on this. I testified to Congress on it last week.
One of the dumbest tragedies we've seen.
Catastrophic. There were 6 states that basically required nursing homes to take infectious patients. And, if you do that, where you have the sickest, oldest, most vulnerable people, you're going to get these catastrophic results. And those 7 states have about 20% of the U.S. population. They have about 62% of the COVID deaths. So I think that policy was a real driver.
So my mom works in a long-term care facility, and she is in not one of those 7 states. She's in Florida, where they did not do that. They did not follow some directive from a governor who felt, why don't we put sick people in nursing homes and, make a bad situation worse. So I'm very thankful for that. But it's a scary thing. And Phil's right.
Florida did really well. And California actually surprisingly did really well. It's interesting. California actually adopted that same New York style policy. But when there was a backlash and everyone went nuts, New York kept it for 6 weeks. California kept it for 2 days. And I think that's the big difference why they haven't had the meltdown in the other big liberal states.
Phil, I mentioned that you're working with your group, American Commitment. Michi's working here at the American Conservative Union to put together a group of conservative thinkers and nonprofits to push back on this drive to socialism. Michi, give us an idea of what you're planning for the rest of the year.
So I think this year the big focus is, and Phil can speak on what American Commitment is doing, but I know for CASM and American Conservative Union, what we care about most is, this drive towards socialized medicine is really starting to catch fire here in America with the electorate. And we have to be careful that we don't allow things like a global pandemic, which has really touched the lives of everybody, make them feel that, oh, well, of course, government can take care of that. They can take care of, your health care. They can take care of, you're setting the prices for prescription drugs. They can take care of choosing what kind of surgeries and what kind of insurance you can pay for. And it's like, we've actually already been down the road of government can pick your insurance. Government can kind of pick and choose what the price of drugs are. And that hasn't really worked out here. We saw it with Obamacare. People lost their insurance. People didn't have access to medicine. And the one thing that Phil said, which is really critical, is as you've seen the mistakes in government that have been made here, the good thing that we have seen is the innovation in the healthcare sector that has helped to actually advance potential cures, potential therapies. And that's done because we don't.
Phil, what's your take on these conservative groups working together? Can we make a difference, or is it just inevitable that we have one national healthcare system?
Well, I think we can make a difference. Look, I mean, everything that government did that was helpful during the pandemic was to waive one of its own stupid rules. And we just had, they finally allowed telemedicine. They had all these emergency use authorizations coming out of FDA. I mean, if the states finally let doctors and nurses from out of state practice in many cases, although in New York, they said, if you come and practice and help us in the crisis, we're going to tax you with New York State income tax.
Of course.
But my point is, when it really mattered, when we needed to be quick and fast and do things, they would be responsive to the threat. We chucked so many of the government rules and regulations, which tells you what they mostly just get in the way.
It also, Phil, you can see it specifically on all the drug remedies for Chinese corona. I think all of us know that the innovation on vaccines and such will also come out of the private sector, which is why when the government is strangling with price controls or overly dictates how we manufacture scientific innovation, we have a disaster.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the real problem we have with pharmaceuticals, with drugs, with drug pricing. Most of the rest of the world has some form of government set pricing. And that means that we have this very unfair situation where we basically carry the weight of paying for the R&D, and it costs billions of dollars to develop a new drug. I mean, these companies right now, what they're spending on these coronavirus drugs, it's astronomical. It's even billions and billions and billions of dollars. But that's normal. Every new drug that comes to market on average, according to Tufts University, costs like $2.5 billion before it comes to market. And that investment can't happen unless there's going to be a return on investment. Unless they can make that money back in a return on capital, you can't justify putting the money into that. And we have this situation where most of the rest of the world really will not pay very much for that. And so we've got a circumstance in this country where people are angry. They say, this is unfair. Why are we carrying this burden? And I sort of agree with that. I'm sympathetic with that. We should get other countries to pay more. That needs to be a key priority in our trade negotiations. But if we just throw up our hands and say, hey, we're going to, if you can't beat them, join them. We're going to adopt price controls too, like Nancy Pelosi wants to, like the House voted to do. Right. Well, then there's nobody carrying that burden. Then it doesn't happen. Then the research and development doesn't happen. You don't get new cures. There's no moving vehicle for anyone to get a free ride off of if we just go ahead and do the same thing that these other countries are doing. And for people who say that, well, it's hopeless, you're never going to get countries to agree to pay more for drugs, you can't negotiate this, I would just point out that the Trump administration in the USMCA actually did get Mexico and Canada to agree to pay more for biological drugs, biotech drugs, by having a longer period of data exclusivity.
And other things. You can negotiate better.
But Nancy Pelosi made them take it out. She said, I hate drug companies so much that I don't want them to make more money from Mexico and Canada, even though that means the US we'd pay less. So they actually, we convinced other countries to pay more for drugs, and then Nancy Pelosi made us take it out. I don't know. I mean, it's amazing.
It helps her, though, in her argument to go after drug companies here in America. So in her mind, that's a way to go after them.
And look, on all these things, I think, Michi, Phil, you would agree, one of the reasons why our groups have to become a lot more aggressive is because groups like the AARP and other groups that get a lot of a free ride over the fact that they're supposedly there as a voice of advocacy for the seniors are actually advocating for all the wrong policies for seniors.
AARP basically functions as a marketing arm of United Health Group. And that's because they make a lot more money from United Health Group than they make from their membership dues. They make over $600 million a year from United Health selling their products. And it's interesting, they recently got sued in Ohio for being an illegal insurance broker, basically, for selling insurance products, even though they weren't a licensed broker, for taking a commission. And they got the case dismissed. They said, we have no fiduciary obligation of any kind to our members. Our members, it's a normal business relationship. And the judge agreed with that. Well, what does that tell you? Look, it's like, okay, at least they're honest in court, but look, they are basically in the business of selling insurance products, and they've got a very clever arrangement. Instead of taking a commission, which would be regulated, they take a royalty. So they license their name, and then they get 5% off the top of all those policies, and it's $600 million a year. And all of their advocacy, going back to Obamacare, if not earlier, has been exactly what's good for United Health's business. And so you have these circumstances like, calls on Obamacare are going 14-1 against among AARP members. They supported it anyway. And they got a carve out. So the United Health Medigap policies they sell can still exclude pre-existing conditions. It's like the only policies in America that can still exclude pre-existing. They written in and they supported it and so forth. They opposed rebate reform. They opposed rebate reform when Trump said, we think that when there's a rebate that's going from the manufacturer to the pharmacy benefit manager, it ought to be passed on to seniors at the point of sale in Medicare Part D, which would have been a huge benefit to seniors. AARP opposed it. You can't make any sense of that except for the fact that United Health owns one of the PBMs, Optum Rx, and the money was coming out of their pocket. It's incredible.
Phil, we are facing just an onslaught of all kinds of different entities pushing socialism. And one of my favorite parts of the Trump era was that great line in his 2019 State of the Union address saying America will never be a socialist country. Let's watch that video.
Here in the United States, we are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. America was founded on liberty and independence, and not government coercion, domination, and control. We are born free, and we will stay free. Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country.
I'm sure you probably agree that's one of our favorite moments in the Trump presidency. Literally standing there with Nancy Pelosi over his shoulder saying America will never be a socialist country. But the socialist forces within America, they're not ebbing. And they're not backing down. And they even seem to have a handle on things like the Supreme Court, which has us very alarmed and concerned. And their push for socialized medicine in America has us very alarmed. Price controls, these terrible ideas of the New Deal and of the 60s, which we thought were dead because they're so stupid and they're counterproductive, are back again in vogue. And we all have to get smart on why they're not going to be helpful. And one of the great people that we love to collaborate with is Morgan Zegers, who's joining us now, who's the founder, literally created this great group called Young Americans Against Socialism. Morgan, how's everything going with your group?
Oh, wow. We are busy. We are busy lately. It's definitely a target-rich environment for us.
That's bad that you're busy. I want you to have nothing to do.
Well, I'd rather work really hard for the next 5 years and make sure that the America that I know and love is protected for generations to come. And that's really what we're focused on. And I think you touched on an important point. There is a very serious issue in the country right now of a small group of people, small group of radicals that are lying to our generation, my generation, about what socialism really is. And so that's really the problem here. And I think if we just attack those guys, if we go after them, we're really going to come out on top here. My generation is very capitalist, entrepreneurial, and innovative. And I think they have American values deep down.
What do they call your generation?
What?
What do they call your generation?
So I'm the last month of the last year of millennials. So I'm kind of nice and snug between Zoomers and millennials.
Okay, because I tend to like the Zoomers. I feel like I think you do, which is they watch the crazy excesses of political correctness and people being triggered over every little thing, and they're just a little more normal. They have common sense seems to be a little more operational. And they learned how to grow up within this really caustic, calcified political correctness. And when did you first experience all that? Was it in school?
Yeah, I went to American University in Washington, D.C., but I'm from upstate New York. And so upstate versus Washington, D.C., very different places. And I had a lot of crazy stuff happen on campus, the usual things you would assume on a liberal college campus like that. But the weirdest thing I had was I had a communist roommate in college, and she had a poster of Mao Zedong, Lenin, Stalin, Karl Marx, and Fidel Castro on her wall. And she had the gall to tell me that conservatives are the mean ones. We are the mean ones because we don't put taxpayer dollars and government action or force behind the things we say we care about. So do we really care about them?
I would have done, if I were you, I would have put one number on your side of the room. All the people those people murdered.
Yeah, well, it was a shame. And that's what was so crazy to me is that we were mean, but she had a poster of mass murderers and dictators on her wall, and she was the righteous one.
Yeah, this whole idea of fascism, which the press always immediately associates with conservative politics, that, we're the fascists. We're the ones that want to dictate to you what you can and can't do, what you can do in your life, what you can't do in your life. And as you experience life and as you get older, and I'm clearly a heck of a lot older than you are, you realize it's completely the opposite, right? Which is people that are truly conservative are focused on this concept that the individual has rights and the individual can dictate the course of their life. Yes, there are confines. Yes, you have to be careful with what you do with neighbors and others, but you get to determine what it is you want to do. And what is really coming across, whether it's the outbreak of Chinese corona, whether it's the economic shutdown, whether it's all these riots and protests and the racial animosities, is I think most conservatives simply want to be left alone by a big onerous government and not be shamed into accepting the fad of the day. Do you think there's truth to that?
I would agree. And I think it's an important point to talk about. When you see numbers like 70% of young Americans would currently vote for a socialist, that was a 2019 poll from YouGov, a lot of people will say, oh, that's because we haven't firsthand experienced socialism or communism. We haven't felt the threat of an oppressive government before. And that makes sense. But what I would say now is that because of the CCP, because of their cover up of coronavirus, because of the impact coronavirus has had on the world and on personally young Americans' families, on our parents, small businesses, our elderly loved ones are passing away. Young Americans didn't go to prom this year. They didn't have their graduations. They missed out on a lot of really important memories. And that all leads back to an oppressive government that lied about coronavirus existing, lied about it spreading from person to person, and then punished and had the people who blew the whistle on that disappear. And so I think this is an important point for us to draw, is that we are personally being impacted for the first time by an oppressive, scheming government.
Yeah, so you think people, Zoomers, people even younger than you, people my daughter's age, I have 5, you're right, they're getting gypped out of all of these memories. I'm fearful that schools won't open again in the fall, even though young people are not vulnerable to getting this virus, and to any large extent at all. You know, we went to a first communion that was delayed, but was almost canceled. I have a niece who was the lead in the play. That play will never go on. I had a daughter who had a dance recital. She spent 6 months on 2 beautiful dances, and she did the dance in front of me. I think we are not sending the right messages to our children in a country where we survived a couple of world wars, a civil war, so many challenges. We never shut down like this.
Yeah. And then especially playing on to that, there is a serious issue right now, and I think it's going to waken up a lot of people where we weren't able to go to funerals for people that we love because coronavirus. We all agreed to those rules. We said, okay, we'll respect them. And then you go on TV and you see that 12,000 people were allowed to rally in Brooklyn for Black trans lives because it was politically appropriate for Mayor Bill de Blasio. And so when you see stuff like Chaz and you see things like Antifa rioting in the streets, I think it's really going to open up a lot of eyes in my generation to seeing how hypocritical big government can be.
Yeah, you know, in Wichita, Kansas, we had an African-American mayor by the name of Carl Brewer, a Democrat, a really great man, a very close friend of my mother's who served on the city council with him. And he tragically died over the last few days. And, you know, a Black man who was a veteran of the Army, who was decent in his collaboration with the Wichita cops. And, you know, I think the community would love to come out and mourn his death and comfort his family, but we're in this era where you should be lucky that you even have the chance to get a funeral. Janice Dean tells the story of her in-laws dying, and they weren't even allowed to have funerals. I think that, once again, that's a tragedy.
Absolutely. But what I will say, and I mentioned earlier that our team is working very hard, we have a growing coalition of young Americans, and some are from socialist countries that immigrated to America, and now they want to protect America because they're so thankful that this country took them in. And there's also people who are like me, who are born here and don't want to lose the America that we know and love. And it's really exciting because when we see something like what's happening in Chaz and Seattle, where they're making this utopian commune that they ran out of food after 2 days, I go to my coalition, I go to Maria, who runs it, and we reach out to everybody who maybe has a perspective that they can share. And they say, well, you know, when I grew up in Venezuela, we had the Colectivo, or there were the Chavistas, or there were these similar groups to Antifa, and I am seeing a lot of red flags here. And so we're really working to have them share their experiences with young people through selfie videos, through testimonies on social media, to help people in America connect the dots between the dangerous movement that is going on right now in this country. And I really think that this is the future of the communication against socialism.
So give our viewers some hope about why this growing generation, these Zoomers, will turn away from socialism. And with the travels before you were kind of shut down, why you feel like America is going to be saved.
Well, I really do believe, after speaking with so many young people on college campuses, after going to so many events and talking with people online, they're just being lied to. And they really do believe if we adopt the Green New Deal and AOC's policies for just society, and if we support Bernie Sanders' policies, we'll end up like capitalist Denmark. And so deep down, Americans are capitalists. They want to chase their dreams. They want to live the lives that they've always dreamed of. They want to make their money. And that's totally fine. There is no shame in doing that. But we really have to draw the line and make a clear understanding of what capitalist Denmark has versus what socialist Venezuela is. And Bernie Sanders' policies are really that distinction. And so I think the more that we focus on results-oriented messaging, this is what we're really working on as a group, talking about the issues young Americans care about most, like climate change or environmental issues, healthcare, finding affordable healthcare solutions, and of course, the rising student loan crisis. I really think talking about those with results-oriented messaging, talking about how we want to lower the cost of these things and how we want to protect the environment, I think we're going to win people over, because conservatives leave this void when we don't talk about these issues that the far left fills in with these radical policies. And to young Americans, like my college roommate who was a communist, at least she saw policy proposals coming from that radical side, and it made her feel like they cared about it more than we did.
So what I hear there is a subtle criticism of too many Republicans in Congress who avoid tough issues. And when you avoid tough issues, two things happen. Either one, the Supreme Court just decides to unconstitutionally and illegally send a dictate and change the law. Or number two, left-wing radicals fill the void and win the hearts and minds of kids.
Exactly. And so I think one really great example is with healthcare. I think conservatives, the more we talk about pricing transparency, the more we talk about bringing competition into the industry, we are going to create accessible, affordable healthcare. Everybody deserves access to affordable healthcare. That should be something that conservatives champion. Why don't we talk like that? And so the left talks like that all the time. And I really think we could win this if we take on some of their tactics.
Well, the other thing that one of the outgrowths of this outbreak of Chinese corona is, I think, a chance for real change in two areas, education and healthcare. I can't agree with you more on the need to really talk about why free market healthcare options actually benefit more people, but also in education. You know, as schools still will not tell us whether they're opening. I mean, I can't believe this as a father, that I can't get a yes or a no from schools onto whether they're going to open, which has me fearful that in the Commonwealth of Virginia, that they won't open. Do you think kids are outraged that their schools aren't opening? And do you think that this is going to result in a lot of change also on the college campuses that are, let's face it, way overpriced?
Oh, absolutely. And I could go on quite a few rants about college and the entire experience.
Do it.
But I just really do think it's a scam. And what they're trying to sell is this idea of a wholesome education, and that they have to put gen eds in, and that you have to become a well-rounded student. You can learn how to paint a picture in your off time. You can take a painting class in your off time. I had to pay $1,400 per credit for a painting class at American University because it was required gen ed. And I think that's ridiculous. And what they do is they make it very difficult. It's not flexible for you to graduate a year early or for you to fit it into a schedule where you can also work. But what I will say is I'm seeing a lot of conservatives talking about we need to make sure that people are learning about the Constitution and our founding documents in college. Those should be required classes. It should be required in middle school. It should be required when these people are coming of age. It should not be required when they're already young adults. It's too late if we're talking about forcing the education of the Constitution in college. That's a time for you to learn your skills, for you to become a professional and build your skills in the industry that you want to build a job in. But it's not something that needs to be taking place right there. So what I think we need to focus on is learning those American values and learning about our founding documents at the dinner table, and more so families focusing on passing down those values and not relying on public education or a college system to do so.
Well, I love what you're saying, because I would love it if the education establishment just came crumbling down, not in the sense of harming people, but in the sense of helping people so that they can get out from under this terrible, corrupt system that we all pay for with our taxpayer money, to all these public universities and high schools and public education. But then a lot of us then turn around and spend a lot of money in the private institutions, which in too many cases aren't giving us the leadership we need in society. You're very inspirational, Morgan. We appreciate you coming on CPAC Live. We love the work you're doing. How do people watching the show help you?
Oh, thank you so much. Well, you can join us if you want to join our coalition, or you can become a contributor with video or written content at fightsocialism.org. You can see all of our videos, all of our content, and of course, you can donate at fightsocialism.org. Thank you so much.
That's awesome. Morgan Zegers, thanks for all the great work you do. And thanks everybody for watching to another edition of CPAC Live. As I said to start the show, in a matter of hours, I'm heading off to the airport with my wonderful wife, and we're going to get on the plane and go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, a place that's 3 hours from a really important city to me, Wichita, Kansas, where I grew up. And we're going to be a part of this great celebration about actually doing something that's in the Constitution, and that's electing a president, something that we have to do constitutionally. And yet there are still some people that would like to shut down the even concept of having a presidential campaign this year because they feel like it's too dangerous. Well, I believe they feel that way because they know that the guy that Donald Trump is running against can barely even be articulate. So it benefits them not to have debates, not to have any public forums, and to just shut this thing down. And I'm proud to be part of the group that's going to go and open this thing up. And what better place than Tulsa, Oklahoma? I actually think it's a great time, even considering the history of the racial animosities in Tulsa, to talk about everything. I love what Morgan just said. Let's talk about everything. Let's talk about it civilly. Let's talk about it with respect, including the racial problems we have in society, including some of the dark parts of our history that we shouldn't be too proud of, but yet we can accept because America has obviously been an imperfect country with a lot of things imperfect in its past. And I believe, unfortunately, a lot of things imperfect in its present. But the great thing is, especially when I go to red states, is I feel so much hope. Morgan feels it in upstate New York. I feel it when I go to a state like Kansas or a state like Oklahoma, and we know so many of you come from those states. And what I would tell you is pray for those of us who are living in these blue states, because it's not always easy. Thanks for tuning in to CPAC Live, and we'll see you again on Monday when we're going to be joined by a really great journalist, Selena Zito. We'll see you all Monday. Take care.